Thursday, March 7th, 2024. My name is Carol Weinshell. I'm the Vice President of Program and Membership at Congregation Rodeph Sholom. And we are continuing in our series of American cinema with Rabbi Eisenberg and Paul and Marcia Friend. The beauty of Zoom is Rabbi Eisenberg is at home, sitting in his study, and Paul and Marcia are in New Jersey, I believe, sitting in their study. What a wonderful thing we can do here together and be able to have a program such as this. I'm going to ask you that if you have a question, to please raise your hand. I want anybody who has a question to have the opportunity, but I'd like to make sure that everybody has the opportunity and not just one person asks the questions. So without further ado, tonight, just to give you the recap, the first session was Jews behind the scenes of American cinema. Mm-hmm. Tonight is Jews on the screen in America cinema. So again, what I say to you is I suspect we're going to learn a lot, we're going to laugh a lot, and we'll share a lot. It's great to have all of you here, and I'm going to ask Rabbi Eisenberg to take it away.
Thanks, Carol. Just to begin, and I'm going to turn it over to Paul in a minute to tell an interesting story that we didn't get to tell last time. But my first show and tell is this, which some of you have seen. And one of the Jews behind cinema, in this case, world cinema, really, but was Al Brodax.
Yep. The animator.
Al Brodax was the producer and animator of Yellow Submarine by the Beatles. Jewish. Okay, anyway. I'd like to open with first welcoming everybody and turning it over now. You know, before I turn it over to my friend Paul Friend, I just want to say that the world, as we all know, is in such turmoil, and there's so much darkness around that it can be so unrelenting that at times you just need to release, let go, have a little fun, talk about things like our topic tonight that are interesting and fun and a diversion. And it may not have the weight and importance of the things you might see in the news or read in the media. But if we don't let ourselves have these diversions, you can just go crazy, and it's not healthy. So in that light, in that spirit, I'm now going to turn it over to Paul.
Thank you. So I'm here with my wife, Marcia, and our Chihuahua, Trixie. You can see peeking out.
She's asleep.
Of the sling, but she's asleep. It's funny, Rabbi, you showed the album Yellow Submarine, and I remember seeing that movie when it came out in 1969 at what was then the Community Theater in downtown Fairfield. I think it's been bought by Sacred Heart University. I don't know if they've renamed it, but it brought back memories of that. And one other funny story about that is that the Beatles thought it was going to be a disaster and wanted nothing to do with it until they saw a draft of the movie, and they were so excited about it that they filmed a little scene that's included at the end of the movie. So were they wrong. They thought it was going to be schlocky. They thought it was going to be like the Beatles animated cartoon that was on between 65 and 67. Mm-hmm. Quite a different experience. I recommend the movie. And as George says in the movie, it's all in the mind, So I thought I would start with a funny story that has nothing to do with Jews in cinema, but it kind of demonstrates that I'm not really the movie fan, but I have learned a lot from the professor. I don't mean Trixie, but Marcia sitting next to me. Marcia had asked me if I had ever seen Gone with the Wind, and I said no. And her one-word response was, when I said I hadn't seen Gone with the Wind, you said,
what he always hears from me, really?
so she sat me down, choice of words delivered there, to watch Gone with the Wind. And the movie starts. I think it even started with the orchestra thing.
Yeah.
And I immediately blurt out, "That's the theme to the $1 Million movie."
Which I'm not from the New York area, so
Marcia didn't know, but I think probably all of you know that was the $1 Million movie broadcast on Channel 9 WOR. I think it was 4:30 in the afternoon, after kids got home from school. But it was interesting that, having not seen Gone with the Wind, I had no idea that tune was the main theme to the movie, and that the
to $1 million movie.
Yeah, to a $1 million movie. So I just wanted to share that with you. It's kind of a funny true life story. Rabbi, I don't know if you have a similar tale, or if you have to that one.
I do. Well, not really, but I have just a quick anecdote about the community theater, which was many of us who grew up in the Fairfield Bridgeport area remember the community theater right off the Post Road in downtown Fairfield. And one of my early experiences with community theater was seeing a movie there in the summer of 1964, also that was produced by a Jewish person named Walter Shenson, and was directed by a Jewish person named Richard Lester, called A Hard Day's Night. But I have to tell you, this is truly a case where I can tell you, I saw the movie, but I did not hear a word. And I still have a vivid memory of being a 11-year-old kid going to that theater, sitting there and listening to screaming for an hour and a half, yelling, screaming, little girls, young girls and teenagers. And I'm sitting there saying, what am I doing here? I don't know anything that's going on in this movie. All I am doing is seeing images on the screen.
Well, Rabbi, I'll top that before moving on. I was 18 months old in the summer of 1964. My mother brought me and my grandmother to see A Hard Day's Night. It was the first movie I ever saw. And my mom to this day tells me she was very proud of me, that she said, "You, Paul, didn't scream."
Oh,
Everyone else might have, but because she was afraid I was gonna, yell, because being 18 months old. But she said she was astonished that I focused on the movie, and she said did not make a sound.
no, other than what you might have done in your diaper. But anyways, let's go back.
Rabbi, before we go any further, because I have to know everything, as you know.
Okay.
Anita Andrade, welcome, but I would like to know who you are, because I don't know you. Anita, will you unmute and tell us who you are?
Do you know Paul and Marcia? Paul and Marcia, are they friends of yours? Okay.
Okay, Ruth and Jules.
Those are mine.
Okay, and Carla.
Ours.
Anita,
Okay.
sorry I don't have a mic. This is, but I can't read the rest of it.
This is
Oh, Glenn. Hi, Glenn. Okay, that's Glenn Germain.
Okay, so Anita,
Paul.
are you going to tell us who you are?
When?
Anita is Glenn.
It's Glenn Germain.
Okay,
Anita is his wife.
Okay.
thank you.
Anyway,
I am very, very tuned in to
Security.
knowing
Carol's
who
worried
is
about
on
security.
Zoom.
Yeah.
So, okay, now it's back to you.
Paul and Marcia, take it away again.
Originally, we thought, or I thought, I had an idea, like, pick a major Jewish actor or actress of the last 100 years. You realize we're almost at the 100th anniversary of the Academy Awards. But Marcia came up with a better idea. Rather than talk about Jewish actors and actresses on film to talk more about, I'm going to use the word, she may disagree, Jewish themes on film. Marcia made the point that that's probably more interesting than saying, in 1920, X was big, followed by Y is big. And let's see, Carla may have to leave, but sorry about that, Carla. She's having speaker problems. Anyway, I assume everyone else can hear us. So instead of going through a list of the biggest star in 1950 was so and so, we wanted to talk more about themes, literally expressions of Jews and more importantly, Judaism and Jewish culture on film, on screen over the past 90, 100 years of film. And Marcia, I'm hearing your prompt comment. Yeah.
So we already talked last time a little bit about movies, that kind of featured Jewish themes. We talked about To Be or Not to Be, Casablanca that didn't mention Jews, other things that didn't mention Jews. And basically,
right.
Yeah, Emile Zola. Basically, as I was looking over films with Jewish themes from the early, pre 1950 or so, there are not really all that many Jewish themed movies. There are a few, but it generally being Jewish as a character or as a subject of a movie wasn't that common and wasn't really that known, I think, to most people. And I was looking at where it started to change. And I think it started to change in the 60s and then much more into the 70s. I think one of the reasons may have been, and I have no backup except that observing how film progressed, is that I think we were talking about the Jewish studio heads last time, and the Jewish studio heads very much wanted to assimilate.
Yes.
They wanted to be, part of the WASP, part of the American experience, whatever, and not necessarily be associated with Jews. And that's one of the reasons that, as Hitler was taking over, they were still, making concessions to release their films in Germany and, not trying to put Jewish things out there.
Yeah.
And the actors of that time also, if you were a Jewish actor, you changed your name. You were not Bernard Schwartz, you were Tony Curtis. It just, you couldn't, none of the actors, Edward G. Robinson, I actually don't remember what his real name is, but it's not Robinson. It wasn't done. And then I'm thinking, well, who were the Jewish actors who actually came out as being Jewish? And Dustin Hoffman. And he was really, I think, the first principally Jewish actor. And I was reading a lot of stuff about The Graduate, and it was written by Buck Henry, who was Jewish, directed by Mike Nichols, who was Jewish, based on a novel by not a Jew, and it is about a WASP experience specifically.
Yes. Yeah,
but Mike Nichols in later interviews said inadvertently he realized that he was making the main character of Benjamin Jewish. And that was why Dustin Hoffman was perfect for the role. And, the alienation from the WASP society, he felt that was one of the reasons. And a lot of his mannerisms and a lot of the things around him were really more inspired by Jewishness than what came out of the book. And when Dustin Hoffman came on, he became a nerdy sex symbol. I mean, he wasn't Kirk Douglas. Yeah, he was your New York Jew. And his look and his mannerisms started to get more common in Jewish romantic leads as you go through the 60s and 70s. You have Richard Dreyfuss and Richard Benjamin, and I meant to make up a list of these, but I talked about them at length with Paul. Now I can't think of who they are.
It's okay, but we know where you're
Barbara Streisand.
Well, I'll get into the women separately.
Yeah,
I'll get into the women is a whole separate thing. But Jewish leading men, Woody Allen also, because I mean he went in as comedic romantic lead basically. But these Jewish men who were identifiably Jewish, that you looked at them, most of their characters were Jewish, they became sex symbols. And you don't have that from earlier the earlier half of the 20th century. It really came, and my theory, going back to the studio heads, is the 60s is when the studio system broke down. It's when the rating system broke down. It's when the release of movies started going more independent, or not necessarily being made through the studio. The whole, the 60s, everything started going against the production code, and they started bringing in a lot of stuff that couldn't be shown in movies before then. And then in like 67 or 68 is when the MPAA and all the movie ratings came along, because nothing was rated before that. It all had to be acceptable to a G audience. And now, as Hollywood evolved in the 60s and moved away from the studios, the types of actors evolved, the types of stories evolved. And I think the Jewish archetype some of it's stereotype, but it's more like the identifying things, the big nose, the New York accent. A lot of people think of the stereotype Jew as going to be the New York accent, and I go back to Groucho Marx on that, and as Paul says, Bugs Bunny on that. And you get that kind of stereotype of, when you see that kind of character, you kind of assume they're Jewish. And up until the 70s, no one actually really said they were Jewish. They just, it was a stereotype. But then in the 70s, it became more explored, and, like Woody Allen's comedies and I'm losing it here. And the other films that were coming out that kind of dealt more with Jewish people in various roles and romantic. And Rabbi mentioned the Jewish leading ladies, and I don't think it worked out as well for them. Aside from Barbra Streisand, I don't think there's any other Jewish actresses, maybe Lainey Kazan, but she's not that big of a name, who really were Jewish on screen. Most Jewish actresses to this day, Natalie Portman, Mila Kunis.
Yeah.
I
didn't know she was Jewish.
They don't have the same identifiable traits that the Jewish male actors do.
Yeah, Woody Allen had Louise Lasser, as you know.
Yeah.
For a while.
Yeah.
Mary Hartman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Take the money and
But there weren't many, you're right. There weren't many.
Yeah, Barbra Streisand is the only one who actually embraced that New York. And I mean, not all Jews are from New York, but like I said, that in people's mind, if you said, think of a Jewish character in a movie, most of them are going to come up with a Brooklyn Jew.
Yeah, and male.
Most likely male.
And Marcia, I think this is maybe an interesting and worthwhile digression. We talked about last time Jews behind the scenes, Jews controlling starting the major movie studios and even most of the minor ones. But Marcia, you said something interesting. So the studio system, owned by Jews, factually speaking, existed for a long time. Can you point to a movie or an incident that you would characterize as maybe the end of the studio system and the beginning of, we'll say, the more explosive cinema of the 1960s?
Yeah, my thing that I point to as the end of the studio system is the movie Anatomy of a Murder. Nothing to do with Jews, though. Do
you remember the year? Ish.
I want to say 58, 59.
Okay.
In that area.
Let's plug in 59. Anatomy of a Murder.
Yeah, because it was the first movie that I am aware of that was released by a very big name director, Rodeph Sholom, with very big. Actually, he might have been.
I'll look that up. Okay.
And he was Jewish too, by the way.
Yeah, okay, that's what Paul just said. I'm like, again, he might have been. And Jimmy Stewart. It was a big picture, and the production code refused to pass it because of the subject matter and a lot of the words in it. And not that they were horrible words, but they were words like rape and panties. And
1959.
And there was a married woman having an affair, and there was, it was a subject matter that was not portrayed in movies at the time. And Otto Preminger said, screw it, I'm releasing it anyway. And Columbia Pictures released it. And I think that was where the production code started falling apart.
Crumbling.
and they started, people started making violent movies and sexual movies and putting in more dirty words. They didn't get as dirty until much later.
Give it 10 years.
10 years. And things started falling apart through the 60s. And I think as that was falling apart, I think the studio system was falling apart because you got a lot more independent people coming in. So that's kind of where I start with the modern, what is broken down into modern cinema, and going from everything was G-rated,
Clean,
cut right after the closed mouth kiss of no more than 4 seconds, yeah, kind of thing, to
a train.
yeah, there's a train through a tunnel, that's all you see, to what became, okay, we have to classify whether the movies are for children or for teenagers or adults or whatever. So, and I think that with that, and with the ability to do more expressive things in movies, I think that's where the studio system started losing it, because they didn't have that kind of control over.
I also want to add a trend I noticed. I noticed a trend again, I know you want to focus on Jewish themes, but before, I just want to also add, when it comes to the Jews on screen, as actors and actresses, I noticed a trend, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm right, that in the Jewish actresses and actors in the 30s and 40s and maybe 50s, like Kirk Douglas, like Tony Curtis, like John Garfield, like Paulette Goddard, like Melvin Douglas, Edward G., and others, most, if not all of them, were born of 2 Jewish parents, many of whom were immigrants from Europe. But as you got into the 60s, 70s, and to the modern day,
you're second generation then.
Yeah, many of the Jewish actors and actresses, again, following on your theme, Marcia, many of them, you wouldn't even know they're Jewish.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is because of their names. Harrison Ford, Daniel Day-Lewis, James Franco, Jake Gyllenhaal, just to name a few. When you learn that they're Jewish, Scarlett Johansson, now Scarlett Johansson is more strongly identified as a Jew and more closely tied, has more close ties with Israel and so on. But the others, most of them, like Joaquin Phoenix and others, many of them were products of intermarriage, and many of them had Jewish mothers.
Right.
So in other words, if you're going by, what does the conservative and Orthodox movement consider to be Jewish according to Halakha, our movement say that it's matrilineal, that it's born of a Jewish mother or through conversion. So many of these actors and actresses do not identify strongly as Jewish. They might kind of admit they're Jewish, but they don't wear it on their sleeves. Many of them were not even raised Jewish.
Right.
Were only Jewish because their mothers were born Jewish. And I think that this is a more modern trend over the last 3 or so decades, as opposed to people like Lauren Bacall and Kirk Douglas and others, in the 40s and 50s.
Well, I would say that's a trend of society as well as films, is that there is a lot more intermingling and a lot less, standard Jewish upbringing in general in society.
Right. It's curious that the movie moguls, many of themselves who were intermarried. By the way, this is no diss on intermarriage. I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying, okay, that many of the moguls were intermarried, but the Jewish actors they hired were, many of them were intermarried, but many of them were products of 2 Jewish parents.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Okay, back to you guys.
Yeah, when Marcia and I were looking at this, it is funny if you look at the actresses and actors, how many of them, and I'm speaking broadly, are Jewish or at least have a Jewish connection. Maybe it's only from the dad's side.
Like Paul Newman, who I don't think ever identified as Jewish, but his father was Jewish.
you can draw connections all over the place. It's kind of funny. And another thing, Rabbi, you triggered a memory. I may have mentioned this last week, but it's worth repeating. That the movie Gentleman's Agreement, 1947, which did win the Oscar, I think for Best Picture of the Year. I think we may have mentioned this story 2 weeks ago. I think it was a Daryl Zanuck movie. Daryl Zanuck, not Jewish, surprisingly, but the story, which I believe is actually true or very close to true, is that the movie was inspired because Daryl Zanuck was denied entrance to a Los Angeles country club because the members thought he was Jewish. Well, you're a big man in cinema, in Hollywood, ergo,
And the name is
he must
enough.
be Jewish. And Zanuck, it starts with a Z, ends with a K. And so I found that story, assuming that it's true or close to true, kind of amazing that it took that incident of being discriminated against without even the gentleman being Jewish to bring the story of anti-Semitism, which is what the movie is about, to the screen in 1947, when even after World War II, it's like we said 2 weeks ago, weren't a lot of movies that were, any movies, very few that were overtly Jewish themed. But, so again, worth going back. So again, on our journey talking about, Jews on the screen, which we broaden out to the Jewish experience on the screen, we were thinking about the types of movies that feature Jewish themes. And we kind of broke it down. I think you could probably safely say that there's certain types. I don't want to say certain shticks, but there are certain types of it that Marcia and I were discussing. And the first, for better or for worse, is, and I'm going to try to use this word broadly without a negative or nasty meaning. I would call, stereotypical Jews.
That's what I was using it as. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, stereotypical. It could be neurotic. It could be, really frugal. It could also be academic achievement. So the stereotype, as I think of it, could go all over the way, maybe leaning negative, leaning positive, trending neutral. And I think that, maybe a classic example, breaking out in the mid-60s and after starting as a comedian, would be Woody Allen. I know we already touched about that. Yeah. And by the way, I recognize that everyone...
Yeah, and we're not all comfortable talking about it now, but...
I'm very sensitive to that.
But his early funny stuff was, funny.
Yeah. I think there's a line from one of his movies, Stardust Memories, which I think was like 1980, where a character, who I think maybe an alien from outer space, says to the character of Woody Allen, played by himself, "Oh, you're Woody Allen. We liked your movies, the earlier ones, the early funny ones."
Yeah.
So I think that's either the exact line or the close line. That really was a little too on the nose. And again, that was like 1980, 1981. And I think that over time, there has been definitely, over the last 40, 50 years, a movement we see away from one-dimensional stereotypical roles. But you can definitely use, again, I know everyone has very mixed feelings about him, but if you were, people always talk, can you divorce the art from the artist? And if you could try to do that, that would be a classic example of somebody making a career, if you will, of using Jewish stereotypes.
And it was a huge influence on comedians and movies to come. I mean, he broke ground for a lot of that type of comedy and that kind of characters. I mean, he was taking advantage of the time. I don't know if he could have been as successful without Dustin Hoffman and without other Jews who had been, coming up as the nerdy romantic lead. So he kind of took advantage of that, made it more comedic. But
that's right.
He was the neuroses example mostly.
Yeah. Another person we might use as an example of the, using stereotypical Jewish character, but leaning, or shall I say, trending positive, would of course be Mel Brooks. Marcia, would you agree with that?
His movies poke fun at Jews to some extent. I mean, other than the producers, it's was his first
19
movie.
1968, just
Yeah.
what, 22 years after the end of World
World War
II.
II. Yeah, I mean that was a pretty bold thing, and I'm not sure anyone other than a Jew could have made that movie, or at least had it well received.
And remember, a lot of the actors in Hogan's Heroes were Jewish.
Yeah,
including Werner Klemperer.
yeah.
That's
yeah. So yeah, Mel Brooks and I was about to say something else. God, I hate when I lose words. Yeah, he his comedy. One of his movies, and I cannot actually hold on. I may have it mixed up.
The Yiddish-speaking Indians.
The Yiddish-speaking Blazing Saddles. Yeah, thank you. The Yiddish-speaking Indians and Blazing Saddles. Oh, and speaking of that, I think there was also when Dustin Hoffman did Little Big Man, because there was always that thing about the Indians possibly being descended from the tribes of Israel. I think that was also part of Dustin Hoffman and Little Big Man. The boy being brought up by Indians.
Interesting there.
Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, the Yiddish-speaking Indians and Blazing Saddles was another nod to that.
Yeah, where something that and I guess the juxtaposition of Indians and Yiddish hadn't been done before, and it was funny because it was just so ludicrous
for those people who knew what they were speaking.
Good point.
Which would have been the Jewish people knowing what they were speaking, because I think a lot of non-Jews would just think it was a made-up language.
Yeah. The Marcia, can you think of like any other famous actors or even actresses who would be a good evidence of the stereotype?
Barbara Streisand, we already mentioned her.
Right. We're thinking about, it's funny, I think about that. I think about Funny Girl, which herself was Fanny, the character of Fanny Brice, herself a Jewish. I'm right about that, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, but I mean, but she also, as she went through, I mean, What's Up, Doc? Although I don't actually think she says she's Jewish in that, you just kind of assume she is.
Yeah. What's Up, Doc, by the way, a great, which I loved when it came out in the movie theaters in 1973. Marcia didn't see it till a few months ago.
Yeah.
But I think it contrasts her character, which you could say is Jewish, even though it's never mentioned at all, versus the very uptight wasp of Ryan O'Neal.
Yeah.
And
Madeline Kahn in that also as what I'll say the other Jewish stereotype. If you've seen that movie, she's the kind of like complaining Jewish mother type in it, even though again she's extremely waspy in it. But I think Madeline Kahn took some of the Jewish stereotypes into her acting in comedy as well.
Did you see the message in the chat from Jules Mermelstein, Gene Wilder, and the Frisco Kid?
I
Wilder.
I need to see that movie again. That's with Harrison Ford. Oh yeah, Gene Wilder in general. I mean, that's starting with the producers. And yeah, he continued Blazing Saddles.
Frankenstein.
Yeah, he continued again that kind of nerdy romantic lead of a Jewish stereotype. Yeah, he was fantastic. Yeah, and Frisco Kid had Harrison Ford in it also. I remember seeing it.
Yeah.
Was that before Star Wars or right after Star Wars?
I don't remember. I think it might have been right after, like 77, 78. Yeah, well, Star Wars was 1977.
What were some of the other categories that you were getting to about?
Oh, sure.
Themes.
So again, we're talking about the Jewish experience as portrayed directly on film, on screen. What else do we have? There are 79. Movies that are 79, so after Star Wars. I hate to, I'll those people on, I'll call them Holocaust films, either directly about or influenced by the Holocaust, World War II, pre-World War II, leading up to post-World War II. As we mentioned last time, Casablanca, which is, Marcia, I know I always get the timing wrong.
44.
42.
42, so definitely in it. I'm just looking at my list.
I actually have it written down here.
To Be or Not to Be.
That's 41.
Marcia, you talked about Mr.
Skeffington, 1944, where one of the characters comes out of a concentration camp.
Right.
There's
In fact, the title character. Am I
yeah,
right?
Mr. Skeffington.
The
himself.
title character. The Diary of Anne Frank, we mentioned that. And then, you can leap across the decades to the more well-known modern films, Schindler's List. God, I forget when they came out. I know we saw it together sometime
Probably like 90
in the
to
90s.
94 in that area.
I think there was Steven Spielberg. That is one theme that continues to echo.
I don't think we even mentioned Steven Spielberg last month when last time when we were talking about Jewish directors. So
because it's endless.
yeah.
Or Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah.
Which yeah. And by the way, one of my favorite movie scenes of all time is, speaking of Mr. Kubrick, who was Jewish, is in the movie A Clockwork Orange, which Marcia doesn't like.
No, I've never seen it. Well,
there's a scene in a record store where the main character, Alex, goes to a record store and picks up a copy of an album called 2001. It actually was the soundtrack to 2001. He picks it up, looks at it, and puts it back.
That's pretty funny.
I thought it was very funny, but nothing to do with Jews on film. Although you could talk a whole session on Stanley Kubrick. That's a whole.
There's nothing really Jewish about his movies. I'm sure you can argue. You can try to extract something and come up with something, but I think you'd be hard pressed.
Yeah. Except the creativity, the auteur experience. Yes. What up? Next, we think you see the expressions of Jewish experience in American cinema and probably other places too. We would call it family dramas and comedies, or family. I think that probably the classic experience, a movie that I would pick out would be Fiddler on the Roof, which Marcia, the movie, I'm not going to talk about the stage presentation, and we've seen a number of stage versions of that. I think Fiddler on the Roof, I didn't look it up sometime in the 1960s, but I
70s for the movie.
Oh, 70s?
The movie was the 70s, yeah.
Okay.
I want to say 74.
You might say that's the ultimate, in my estimation, and I'd like to think everyone would agree, Jewish family experience. There are other more modern versions 71. Of that. 71? Okay, I thought it was late 60s.
Yeah. Okay.
Crossing Delancey from the
with Amy Irving.
1990s.
And
Avalon, Barry Levinson's movie about a Jewish family.
Actually, I was just thinking, although it's not entirely my favorite year, because I mentioned Lainey Kazan earlier, and she's in that.
Peter O'Toole.
Peter O'Toole, and I think he did. Yeah.
Okay, it was the
but God, the actor Mark. I can picture him so well, and I cannot think of his name. Anyway, he's a writer, and it's supposed to be a semi-autobiographical movie. And he takes Peter O'Toole, the Errol Flynn type guy, home to meet his mother and family, and the extended Jewish family. So it's very funny.
I know I appreciate it when Jules gave comment. Can anyone else think about, because the films we're talking about right now, family dramas or comedies. Can anyone come up with any other films that they would say could fall into the Jewish family experience movie? I see a hand raised. The Lees.
You have to unmute.
You're mute, however, and you're still muted.
Or you can type into chat. You're muted. Jackie has her hand raised too.
Okay.
Jackie, go ahead.
This is not family themes, but you spoke about the Holocaust before.
Go ahead.
And then there was the movie Exodus.
Right.
And then I don't know, was The Wall I think The Wall was made into a movie also. Besides the Anne Frank.
I don't remember that.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Wall. I assume you don't mean the Pink Floyd album.
No, it was a Holocaust book. And I thought I had read the book. I thought it was made into a movie, but I could be wrong. But Exodus definitely was very popular.
Yeah, and and that's I forgot about Exodus, and that would be a big deal since that's about the formation of the state of Israel, based on the Leon. I can never pronounce it correctly.
Yours.
Yeah, wow, I missed Exodus. I'm embarrassed to admit that. That's great, and that's why I encourage the participation of people, because we can come up with stuff, but we do want to have it interactive.
I think you
Yeah.
also should mention Roman Polanski's, another very controversial figure, of course,
Of course.
but his supreme achievement, The Pianist with Adrian Brody, which was one of the most powerful, in my opinion,
That's
Yeah.
Holocaust movies. Adrian Brody won an Oscar for that.
Ah,
I think Leon Gould is unmuted now.
Thank you.
Leon, did you want to add something?
Yes, there's a major theme in American cinema, which should not be overlooked,
go ahead.
and that is making it in America and the sacrifices which that entails, which could be quite severe. For example, in Body and Soul in 1947, John Garfield, he sold himself out to the mob in order to become a champion. And in Duddy Kravitz with Richard Dreyfuss,
Yeah.
About,
Which Richard Dreyfuss really hates, by the way. He don't ask him about it.
you actually you just accurately predicted, I would say, the next type of film, which we would call broadly the Jewish immigrant experience, coming to America, living in America, dealing with assimilation, cultural identity, the pursuing the American dream. And you could I always think of the comedy movie An American Tale with Fievel, the mouse, also the name of my grandfather. Fievel Freund came to America in 1914 and became Philip Friend. I think Hester Street, not well known anymore, but I think would count. Can anyone think of any other what I'll call Jewish American immigrant experience movies other than the ones that we just rattled off?
Yeah, I just had one in my head, and it's oh my God, the one by Paul Mazursky. And it involved a Holocaust survivor. Marcia maybe could get it. Look up Paul Mazursky's filmography, but there's the one that he did, and I'm blanking out on it. And another very obvious one is Goodbye Columbus. I mean, even though it wasn't direct immigrant experience, it was still, second generation making it in America kind of thing.
Right. So that would count, if you want to continue the category broadly.
Trying to find it.
Okay.
Well, I didn't get his full thing here. Anyway, keep talking.
I can do that.
Okay.
Another type of Jewish movie, as we continue to round the corner of the list, Marcia and I discussed this, movies that explore Jewish identity, grappling with faith, I'll call it religious and cultural exploration. I kind of pulled Yentl out of a hat for that one. But Marcia, also reminded me of a movie that I think we did allude to last time. It came out in multiple versions. Would you say The Jazz Singer is also?
Well, The Jazz Singer deals with the Jewish family, and it deals with assimilation, because that's what the main character is basically doing, is giving up the more traditional Jewish family to assimilate and be in show business.
And I think you also said you might throw Gentleman's Agreement into that category. I mean,
Well,
that was like
it's assimilation, but it's a different,
a different kind.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone can think of other, I'll say religious and cultural exploration type movies, because I know there's been a number of them, but we could only, because again, we're trying to think about things movies that would be fairly well known and still remembered even after all this time. And so, Marcia, what are you looking at, Paul?
Just don't look at what I'm looking at.
Okay, I'm not going to look at what you're looking at. In fact, I'll throw this question out to Ruth and Jules. I thought of a category, but I have to admit we couldn't come up to mind. So maybe Rabbi, Ruth and Jules, others could come up with this. And I know it's been made, but couldn't think of it. Movies where you have Jewish characters as political or social activists. What I'm saying is, I believe there's been movies about that, but I couldn't think of any
Yeah, the
Reddit.
one that just came out a few years ago by Aaron Sorkin, the trial of the Chicago Seven.
Yeah.
Was there anyone?
Wait. Do you mean there was crosstalk? Rabbi, what was the movie you were thinking of?
The Chicago Seven. What was the name of the movie? By Aaron Sorkin.
The trial of the Chicago Seven.
Yeah.
We saw on
Yeah, we saw it. Yeah.
okay,
Yeah,
we saw it. In fact, I think Marcia
Yeah, I
said
had
that.
mentioned it when we were talking about because I said when he was talking about activists, and I said Abby Hoffman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one. Mississippi Burning, where
Actually, Norma Ray also.
right.
Norma Ray is
Yeah.
in fact, is that Richard Benjamin in that? Who plays the guy in that goes to make the union?
I don't remember.
It might have
But yeah, I don't know. But Norma, sorry, Mississippi Burning. With two of the three who were murdered in that infamous story, were Jewish.
Yes.
Civil rights activists. That's another example.
Yeah. And
yeah.
And I was thinking, instead of looking it up, I thought I would throw out the question because I know it's been out there. So what we've tried to do is, and I don't, we weren't trying to artificially put stuff into categories, but I think that we've kind of done a decent summary of the types of movies, that have depicted the Jewish experience. Now, Ruth, actually, Jules just came up with an interesting one.
That's a good one.
He said
RBG.
that on the basis of sex, the story of, I think, Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Yeah, there were both movies. There was two movies.
RBG was a movie.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
look that up.
Yeah.
You mentioned the jazz singer, which we had mentioned previous, but I appreciate the the contribution to that.
We mentioned it first. You just didn't say it.
Mazel tov. Thank you. We said it first.
No, you.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, you said.
Oh, Paul, we should also mention the movie. Was it called School Ties with Brendan Fraser? On the subject of anti-Semitism, who experiences anti-Semitism at a boarding school. Came out about 20 years ago or so, or more, 25. I think it was called School Ties.
Okay.
Some of you may have seen it. We used to show it
Yes.
at youth group, at USY or youth group kinds of activities. It was very widely shown in synagogues and JCCs around the country. Brendan Fraser did an excellent job in that movie, playing a young Jewish student who is terribly persecuted on the basis of his Judaism.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to throw that movie in too.
I appreciate that. Had it, not a movie that was in my mind, and I appreciate the contribution. Basically, I think that, you might say that we've gone to the end of our categorization of movies portraying the Jewish experience, but we thought it'd be interesting to kind of put it into categories as opposed to this actor, that actress. Marcia, with respect to your notes, was there any concept that
No,
we may not have addressed from what in
um,
terms of your syllabus?
my note. I think we covered everything I put down in my notes.
Or maybe there's something we're missing that people think
Somebody else
would add, that they would come up with.
maybe that you're thinking of and how it relates.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe, does anybody have any category that we may have omitted? I was wondering about Jewish science fiction or Jewish horror movies, but I have to struggle with that one.
Jewish horror movies. I mean, Universal.
Yeah,
Horror movies were Carl Laemmle.
yeah.
The other thing, I mean, you could go into biopics of Jews.
Right.
Yeah, there's lots of those out there.
You mean about?
Well, just
Jewish
biopics
characters
of
per
Jewish
se.
people. Yeah.
But we, in trying to survey the world, we were trying to map out the world, if you will, for you. And again, I think we've covered the metaphorical globe in terms of the Jewish experience as portrayed in modern American cinema. There may be movies, for example, about Israel, the Middle East, talk about the conflict. But I don't
not a huge amount in American cinema.
Yeah,
I think it's a
I
subject
can't
that
think of any.
yeah, it's a subject that American cinema does not do a lot with.
Right, and we're talking about American
Yeah.
cinema, not about Israeli cinema or movies that may have been made
Yeah.
elsewhere.
Yeah.
We kind of noticed that maybe might have been a theme, but without digging too hard, we couldn't think of any or find any.
I think your knowledge is unbelievable. Between the two of you, you know so much, and you just can share and pull out dates and times and places
Estimates,
people.
and guesses, and yeah.
So let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
How did this whole subject pique your interest? Where did that come from?
Marcia, what started your love of movies? 'Cause
My
if
love
you-
of movies just in general. Honestly, I never really thought about Jews in cinema until the rabbi asked us about this.
what triggered your
so
love
that
of
was like
movies per se?
my love of movies was, I will say, peer pressure. I went to NYU,
Okay,
and probably around November or December of my freshman year, my friends dragged me to a black and white movie that I really didn't want to go to, and it was called It's a Wonderful Life, and I
1946.
kind of got hooked on it there. And because I was living in the village, and at NYU, there were a lot of films around, a lot of film students, and there was a particular theater there that we actually walked by recently when I was there with a friend, called Theater 80. It was on St. Mark's Place over by First Avenue.
80 St. Mark's.
Yeah,
Probably.
80 St. Mark's
Okay.
Place. Yeah.
Okay.
That every day they showed two different movies, and just in rotation, and they would give you a 2-month schedule in advance, and they were themed. So I still remember the first ones that we saw were It's a Wonderful Life, which, thank goodness, that was the first one we saw, because had it been the second one, which was called Christmas Holiday with Gene Kelly, which was a horrible movie. I don't think I ever would have watched another black and white movie. But it's just, I went there so often. I still remember they used to do Hitchcock double features. Probably my favorite that I went to almost every month was All About Eve and Sunset Boulevard. It was like every month a double feature, and I must have done that like 10 times.
What about the Thalia?
The
West
Thalia
Side,
was uptown.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
You take the subway, you go uptown, so what?
even when I lived in New York, I always hated the subway. So, and I lived on 8th Street, so going to
That's a
St.
lot.
Mark's Place was like 3 blocks away.
Right.
And plus there was 8th Street Playhouse at the time. There was
Yes.
the Quad.
You didn't need to schlep
There was
uptown.
whatever the one was on 6th Avenue. I actually just saw a photo of it recently. I can't remember what we were talking about. I said they used
And Paul, how about you? Where did this start for you? Oh,
I mean, listen,
okay.
I didn't see Sunset
You didn't see-
Boulevard
or
or
Gone
All
with the
About
Wind.
Eve or Gone with the Wind or God knows what else until I met Marcia.
Yeah,
Because I was the music nerd. And listen, I loved, Carol, going to current movies at the county cinema, 99 cents, the Community, the Beverly, the
Yeah.
current movies. And I remember like one time my dad, they were showing at the Merritt Theater Captain's Courageous from the 1940s. And my
such a
dad
hokey
really
movie.
wanted to take me to see it because it was a big deal when he was 13. I
Spencer
remember
Tracy,
seeing it.
Spencer Tracy, Freddie Bartholomew.
We didn't rehearse this. Carol, he dragged me to
Doing the
see
worst
it.
Portuguese accent.
And I didn't want to see it. And I didn't like it because it was in
black
black and white. But he loved it. It was like a one-off showing at the Merritt.
I remember the Merritt. That was my neighborhood.
So we know. So again, I was a fan of what I'll call hot movies of the moment. So I saw Star Wars when it came out, et cetera, et cetera. Consumed lots of movies from the mid-70s to the mid-90s. But going back to classic cinema, I wasn't joking with the whole Gone with the Wind thing, so I blame it on.
I went through like phases after once I got a VCR, I had to get a second VCR because I was always renting movies and dubbing them so I could keep them. And I went through phases where like every single Barbara Stanwyck movie, every single Bette Davis movie, every single Alfred Hitchcock movie, and I would hunt down. There were quite a few video stores in the village where you could get movies that were never released on video. And I had quite a few of them. Was that what it was called? It was on the second floor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Kim,
Interesting.
Yeah.
Carol, with your permission, I want to
Yeah.
mention a movie. I want to mention a movie that has not yet been mentioned.
please go ahead.
And even though we've been keeping it light in many ways, so I apologize for making it a little bit more heavy and serious. But Paul and Marcia were challenging us to think about movies having to do with Middle East themes, Israel themes, and so on. And there's one movie that was not mentioned that I think should be, which was controversial, and that was Munich by Steven Spielberg, with
Yeah.
a screenplay by Tony Kushner. Tony Kushner is quite well known as being pretty much anti-Zionist. I may be oversimplifying it by calling him an anti-Zionist, but I will say that he's not the most pro-Israel playwright or screenwriter that there is. He's got very deep ambivalence about Israel. And again, I don't want to get controversial tonight necessarily about Israel, but that was a movie that addressed a very, very difficult subject. And both Spielberg, and this was after Schindler's List. So with Schindler's List, Spielberg got all the cred he needed with the Jewish community that would probably last a lifetime. But then he made Munich, and that kind of compromised his cred with certain segments of the Jewish community who criticized him and Kushner for writing a movie that seemed to present some kind of equivalence between the Palestinian murderers and terrorists in the 74, I think it was 72 Olympics, thank you, and the Israeli operatives that came in to exact justice, I will say. I'm not even going to use revenge, but the movie essentially portrayed it as revenge, perhaps more than justice. And for that, Spielberg got a lot of criticism for. So,
thank you. Rabbi, I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Paul and Marcia. Where and how did you start with movies?
it's very easy for me to answer that because Paul alluded to it at the very beginning. It was $1 Million Movie on WOR Channel 9, where the same movie was shown 6 days a week, or 5 days a week rather, Monday through Friday, maybe once on the weekends, in the afternoon after school, and then in the evening as well, twice a day. And they would repeat the same movie every day for 5 or 6 days, 5 days anyways. And most of the movies that they presented, again, I grew up in the 50s and early 60s. Most of the movies that they presented were movies of the 30s and the 40s. So the first time I saw King Kong was on $1 Million Movie. I became a huge Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers fan because of seeing The Gay Divorcee on $1 Million Movie. I became a big Henry Fonda fan by seeing the movie Slim on $1 Million Movie. And also I have to note that $1 Million Movie could not show long movies like Gone with the Wind or movies like that, because it was slotted into a 2-hour time slot or so with commercials. And they also edited, I think, Marcia, you can tell me if I'm wrong.
I didn't know $2 Million Movie, but things were heavily edited to fit.
Heavily edited and cut and whatever.
And especially on $1 Million Movie, they may have also been showing a lot of public domain movies, and those things were edited like crazy.
Yeah.
Anything you wanted on those.
But Carol, it didn't matter to me. Okay. I didn't know from editing. I was a kid. I saw these movies and I was enamored, and I learned them by heart. Gunga Din was another one, totally politically incorrect, whatever. Okay.
Cary Grant is an Indian.
But no, Sam Jaffe.
He was the Indian, yeah.
Did you say the 10 Commandments at all?
Actually, we had forgotten, we had talked, Paul and I were discussing this earlier this week about the biblical representation of Jews and Jewish stories. And we were going to mention it, and I said, in a way, like in terms of being, if you're presenting Jewish people to the public, I don't think like they're going to think, oh, the 10 Commandments or Samson and Delilah or those, because when you look at biblical Jewish,
yeah.
Well, it's not that they're not Jewish.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're seeing like knights in the Middle Ages. It's like this fantasy. It's like a fantasy mythological thing.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily something that you relate to in your life.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You're looking at it like a costume drama and that kind of thing. So the biblical movies, when I thought about that, it's like, yeah, they show Jews, but it's not the same kind of connection to Judaism that we were talking about in a lot of our other movies.
But what is interesting about the 10 Commandments, again, we could have a course just on biblical movies, okay? But the 10 Commandments, one of the things that's interesting is that Cecil B. DeMille and the writers of that movie, the script writers, relied heavily on midrash, and they didn't, there were a lot of stories in there that were not from the Torah, but they got them from midrash, and they had actually rabbinic consultants on that movie to help them come up with some of these stories that filled in the blanks, about Charlton Heston and, Moses growing up in the palace of Pharaoh and falling in love with Ann Baxter, and.
Did you ever see the silent version of it? The Cecil B. DeMille silent version?
In the 1920s? Yeah.
I never saw that.
I haven't either, and I'm wondering how it compares, because basically it's a remake. I mean, it was his own film in the first place, and I've seen stills from it, but I actually have no idea how the plot relates to the 1920s version.
I know.
They both involved, I think they both involved a Nile River, and they both involved plagues and a mountain and Sinai.
Oh yeah, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it was originally the 20 Commandments, but they edited
They
it.
cut it in half. Yeah, that was the That was the edited version of $1 Million.
Oh, and Marcia and Paul, you should mention the History of the World Part 2 on that level.
Yeah.
Which well, we've not seen that. I remember 2 weeks ago I mentioned that the 10 Commandments, I think in the 1955 or so, did like overtly mention Jews, which was interesting. I don't know what they did in 1925. Oh, Rabbi, speaking of edits, something that is related to the $1 Million movie, which you may have been a little too old for this, the 4:30 movie on Channel 7, also heavily would edit movies because they had less than 90 minutes to show something between 4:30 and 6. And sometimes for big movies, like I think Ben-Hur, they would 2 or 3 days. They would show it over the course of like 4 or 5 days. But they had Monster Week, which is all Godzilla each day. That was another way for kids in the 60s and 70s to see old movies. So,
Carol, great. I think we should see if people want to make comments or questions. Oh, History of the World Part 1. Yeah, I said Part 2.
Part 2 is something they're supposed to be making.
History of the World Part 1, but that's where.
That's right. They did on Hulu. Yeah.
Mel Brooks is playing Moses, and he's coming down with 3 tablets or something.
The 15 Commandments.
And he drops one and he goes, "Oi, 10 Commandments." Anyway.
So does anybody else want to add something or about an experience you had, a special experience with a movie? Any of you, in quotes, old Bridgeporters, not old age, just old?
We're offering Oscars to good questions.
Yeah.
I will tell you that when Judy went to Brown, she had a friend named Joan. Joan grew up thinking that the word Machaya meant air conditioning, because one time Joan and her grandmother went to a movie theater during a hot summer day. You know where I'm going with this. And Joan's grandmother walked into the theater where it was cool, and she says, "Oh, it's a Machaya." Machaya means like, it's a Yiddish word. It's based on Hebrew. somebody give me a good translation. I mean, Machaya means great,
A pleasure.
a pleasure,
Machaya means
The great
Machaya.
thing.
a great thing. Yeah. So but Joan thought Machaya meant air conditioning.
Well, going to a movie was a very big thing for us. I can't even remember the first time that I went. I mean, that just wasn't something we could really afford.
Carol, do we
And-
have like 5 minutes where maybe people could either unmute or put it
Yes,
in the chat and tell
we
us
do.
what was the first movie you saw? Do you in the movie theater on the screen?
I don't remember. I remember the first play I ever saw, and that was My Fair Lady, and I was probably
Lucky you.
11.
Lucky you.
And the first R-rated movie I saw was The Longest Yard, and I think Ruth and Jules took me to it.
The what?
Now-
Great.
And then the second R-rated movie I saw was Lenny, and that was a total mistake. But Mom had dropped me off at the movie theater too early, so I snuck in and watched it, and that was like really a lot for a 14-year-old.
So does anybody else want to share the first movie? Debbie?
Sound of Music.
Oh,
My
my favorite.
My grandmother took me, and it
Great.
was, I don't remember how old I was, but 10, 9, and it was like such a treat. And we got all dressed up to go to the movie.
And Ruth and Jules put in How the West Was Won,
That was
which
Joel.
actually I saw too in New York. Did you see it in the Cinerama
Yes.
That
in New York?
Cinema.
I was on TCM recently, and it is so weird when they show up.
Cinerama, yeah.
No, it was just a regular theater.
The regular theater.
Yeah, regular theater.
The first movie I saw was Bambi. I was maybe 4 years old. During those days, Disney was re-releasing all these movies. So I saw Bambi when I was maybe 4 or 5, and then I saw Snow White sometime later. But Bambi is traumatic.
Yes.
I mean, imagine a little kid seeing Bambi, with mama being shot to death by a hunter. But that was my first movie. And I remember just being so enamored of the big screen. Anybody else remember their first movie, Jack?
Jackie?
This is not my first movie, but does anybody remember going to the movie theater for the 3D movies and you had to wear glasses
Yeah.
to see it in 3D? They had special glasses that we had.
You don't have to.
Don't you have to do that?
And didn't,
Have to do
and
it.
didn't,
There's although now they're like plastic and you have to turn them.
Right.
They sounded-
Yeah.
They were the cardboard ones back in the day.
and didn't they
Debbie?
give dishes away on Saturday or something?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
Debbie, you,
I got one.
okay.
Old Yeller downtown Bridgeport.
You guys are seeing awful movies.
That was an awful movie. Yeah, that was an awful movie. And then I had
Disney.
I had a
Walt Disney
friend
Studios.
when I was like 12 years old. His father actually ran the projectors over at the Stratford Theater. And so we, once in a while, would get to see a free movie over there. Steve McQueen, Great Escape, Hush Hush, Sweet Charlotte. That was another. Yeah, we got to see a few movies over there for free.
Ruth and Jules have their hands up.
Yeah, I remember, I don't know if Marcia remembers this, Mom and Dad loading us into the station wagon, parking backwards, and we all laid down in the back facing the movie theater.
At the
Movie screen.
at the drive-in
Driving.
movies that we saw there that weren't Disney, because the only thing I can think of was Disney. And it was like the county drive-in or something. I remember they had a great playground.
Yeah, Bridgeport had a drive-in.
We did over off Lindley Street,
Yeah.
right?
Candlelight.
Yeah.
Candlelight.
Candlelight picks.
Yeah, Pix and Candlelight.
Yes.
There you go.
Yeah.
Screens.
That was a big night to go. Big.
Yeah. I saw Exodus there. Can you believe it?
Oh, my. Debbie, you had another one?
I'm thinking that maybe, I'm trying to remember, I think maybe the driving, maybe I saw Mary Poppins. Those were like my two things I remember from childhood. But the other thing I remember is when I was 16 years old, for like a year running, the Merritt Theater in Bridgeport had only one movie, The Exorcist.
Oh,
Well, that was back, you remember back in the day, especially in the mid-70s.
Well, they-
Now it is 19th week,
Yeah.
Jaws or, The
Yeah.
Godfather.
So I remember watching Jaws. Mom was at Loman's and I absolutely hated Loman's. And I would stand outside and you could see the drive-in theater across the street. And I remember watching Jaws on the drive-in screen from standing in front of Loman's.
Oh,
I didn't watch the whole
Sheila.
thing, but
Sheila, besides the dishes, do you remember anything else to share? No? Okay.
Carol,
Debbie, the Exorcist was directed by a Jew, William Friedkin.
Friedkin, yeah.
Yeah,
we're everywhere.
so many. Right, we're everywhere. We're all over the place. We're taking over the world.
Erica?
With our space.
Okay, so my first movie that I remember seeing is Love Italian Style. It's Gina Lollobrigida and Sophia Loren. I didn't see American movie till I came to this country.
So
Love
Okay.
American style or marriage or divorce American style. I mean, divorce Italian.
Italian style, right?
Divorce,
But
divorce
I
or
have a
marriage.
question. Walter Matthau, I like him as an actor. Nobody mentioned him,
Oh,
right?
you're right.
And Neil Simon. I love Neil Simon.
Yes,
I love the California Suite.
Good name. Yeah, we didn't even talk about Neil Simon, guys.
Yeah.
yeah, for Jewish Experience. Yeah.
Yes. You need another show,
Yeah.
another program.
Erica, you piqued a nerve for me now to take what you said to go to Nima. Because Nima, you did not grow up here. So did you have movies that you went to see like we're talking about?
I'll talk about some experience we had. In the summer, we didn't have amechaya. In other words, we didn't have air condition in the late 1950s. So there was big screen, close screen in the lawn area, and all the members of the kibbutz would sit there and watch the movie. And we, the children, would sneak in the back. And I remember there was a movie with Brigitte Bardot, and they were kissing, and we were not allowed to see that. But it was, it was cinema paradiso. That was our life like. We were able to watch.
Salach Shabati, I bet. Salach Shabati.
Yeah, we saw some of the.
Chaim Topol. Yeah.
Foreign films.
They were called Burekas movies because they were sort of about the Mizrahi experience.
Right. Yeah. One of the greatest people may have heard of is Salach Shabati, right?
Yeah,
with Chaim Topol before he just became known as Topol and starred in Fiddler on the Roof. But in the 60s, he was one of the biggest film stars in Israel.
Yeah.
Right.
So this is now like Hanukkah around the world. Watch now. Gracie, how about you? And tell, right?
I don't know if it was the first movie I ever saw, but I remember it vividly because in the Sudan, the movie theaters were open air. And so, of course, you didn't go until nighttime. And we were watching Love in the Afternoon with Gary Cooper, Audrey Hepburn, Maurice Chevalier. And all of a sudden, the clouds just burst open and it started to pour. And there were verandas like around the edges. And everybody made a mad dash. Nobody would leave the theater, but we sat there under the verandas watching the movie until it cleared and we went back to our seats. So that was one of my first experiences with the movies.
That's a great memory.
Yes.
So we've been to Israel, we've been to the Sudan. We had Erica who came from the Soviet Union and didn't see movies growing up. Anybody else want to share?
I mean, we did have television in the 60s. We already had television and we watched lots of movies from Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and foreign movies.
Interesting.
And there were some,
Let's-
as Marcia and Paul know, but especially Marcia, there were some really great movies coming out of those countries in the 60s, even though it was the Iron Curtain. Some of the great directors of the time were working behind. I mean, that's where Roman Polanski started in Poland, and some of the Czech directors,
And Hungary, yeah, Hungary,
Hungarian Agnes Varda, and
right.
and really some great filmmakers, were working,
I can't think of this film, the title of the film. It's a gift shop, and it's based like in Hungary, a music box.
Yes.
Oh, I love that movie. That's my favorite.
Corner or Good Old Summertime, whichever one you wanted to pick.
And
No,
the
it's-
actor in it.
Was actually Shop Around the Corner was supposed to take place in I thought Poland actually, but
No, wait, but Erica, are you
Music
thinking
box?
of a
Music
are you
box?
thinking are you thinking of a foreign movie or an American movie?
It's American movie, but European actors. One of them.
right, Shop Around the Corner. It had Felix Bressert and Cuddles, S.K. Sakal, and
James Stewart.
Jimmy Stewart.
Right. One of them is Christmas in Connecticut, I think, the movie, and he's the chef.
Yeah.
The same actor in several movies.
Yeah.
I love him. He's very good actor.
Connecticut is Barbara Stanwyck pretending to be a
Right.
chef and homemaker, and it was it wasn't Gary Cooper, was it? Who was in Christmas in Connecticut?
They came to Westport
Yeah.
from New York.
Great memories, Carol.
I think this is wonderful. Does anybody else have a memory before we wrap this up?
Carol, maybe
Yes.
I kind of put a pin on everything. The other day on a Facebook page about Bridgeport, somebody posted a ad from 1954 announcing the opening of the Beverly Theater.
Oh,
The ultimate in movie comfort, more
Yes.
parking, more air conditioning, bigger seats, the ultimate movie experience. They made this place out to be, a paradise on earth. It was,
Yes.
but Carol, what was amazing was that it was a very wordy ad, and it was amazing how much of a push they were doing to advertise this place. They were making this place out to seem like the best thing on earth. It was a movie theater, but I guess that was the heyday, perhaps, of American cinema.
It probably was the
Oh.
best thing on earth in 1954 here.
Yeah.
Yep.
Real.
And several of us, Carol, had birthday parties. I had at least one or two at birthday parties at the Beverly Theater.
Wow.
Watching
And now it's a storage place.
watching matinees. Like one of them was a Jerry Lewis movie. Yeah. So there's some fond memories of that.
in 2024, we don't have a movie theater in Fairfield or Bridgeport.
Isn't that something?
Really?
Wow.
Yeah.
How sad is
Well, I would like to say, as I wrap this up, we went much longer than I thought, and I wasn't going to stop it. That's for sure. First of all, thank you all for your participation, because whenever we can bring people in when it's timely to do, it's really great. And we certainly went around the world, which we do a lot at Rodeph Sholom. Paul and Marcia, I said it before, but I'll say it again. You are amazing. Your knowledge is just incredible. And the way you and Rabbi Eisenberg work together and make this happen, it's so fluid. If we didn't know, we would think that you rehearsed for hours.
We
and
did.
I know
We did not
that
rehearse.
We haven't even talked for a month except on the screen
Yeah.
here.
and so it's wonderful because it's just so perfect. So on behalf of Rodeph Sholom, I want to thank you both, the friends, our friends, and Rabbi Eisenberg for another wonderful session. and to tell you that next year we're going to do it again with a different theme. And the last thing I want to tell you is this Shabbat, we are going to have services in person with a special kiddush that Jill is sponsoring. And it should be lovely. Nima's smiling. She knows the food is going to be terrific. So between Nima and Rabbi Eisenberg being together, our two rabbis in one room instead of on Zoom, what more could you ask for? So come along. We'll be looking to see you and looking forward to seeing you. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Stay
Carol.
safe.
Thank you,
Thank
Paul and
you,
Marcia.
Fran.
Thank you.
Carol,
Yes.
are we going to have services in the chapel or in Friend Hall?
Friend Hall.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we
Every
think
Saturday.
Friend Hall is a better option because, you know, norovirus and other things
Yes.
going around, and it's still winter, and so
We won't,
Friend Hall we
be,
can spread
yeah,
out a little more.
we won't be sitting in each other's laps.
Right.
Does that help, Sheila?
Thank you, Paul and Marcia. And I was just
Thank
wondering,
you,
is that
thank you.
Trixie? Is that the new one? Is that the
This one
number
is-
3?
This one is Trixie. Yoda got up for a minute. He just got down. He's the bigger one. And we
Well,
have
only because of Facebook, I know your family there. So,
Angie's not here, so.
the other one's not here.
oh, okay. Well, welcome,
Thank
Trixie.
you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Very
This is
enlightening.
the third
Thank
room
you.
today, Carol.
Have a good
Rabbi,
night. See you Saturday.
Thank you.
in
Yeah.
one day.
Paul, I mentioned Friend Hall not because you're here, but because we really are having services in Friend Hall.
Why not? I can't think of a better named place.
There you go.